And the winner is Christoph Waltz in Inglourious Basterds.
This is the first Academy Award and nomination for Christoph Waltz.
For 30 years, Christoph Waltz was just another face on German television. A familiar character actor who appeared in crime dramas, TV movies, and even children's shows. But then Quentin Tarantino came along and turned him into one of the greatest villains in modern cinema. But here's what you don't know. Tarantino almost abandoned Inglourious Basterds entirely because he thought he'd written an unplayable character. The role of Hans Landa was so complex, so linguistically demanding, that after a year of searching, Tarantino was ready to shelve the entire project. So today, I want to show you how one audition changed everything, and why Christoph Waltz didn't just become a great actor, he became the blueprint for what makes a villain truly terrifying. The Invisible Man. Christoph Waltz was born into Vienna's theatrical aristocracy in 1956. His father, Johannes, was a set designer. His mother, Elisabeth, a costume designer. His maternal grandmother, Maria Mayen, had been a Burg theatre actress and silent film star. Acting wasn't just in his blood, it was the family business. But here's the thing about being born into theatre royalty. It doesn't guarantee you'll conquer it. After studying at Vienna's prestigious Max Reinhardt Seminar and training with Lee Strasberg in New York, the same institute that shaped Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, Waltz returned to Austria with all the credentials for stardom. Instead, he got something else entirely: decades of obscurity. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, Waltz became Germany's most reliable character actor. He appeared in Tatort, the country's longest-running crime series. He starred in TV movies like The Lentz Papers and Das andere Leben. He even directed his own German television film in 2000. For over 3 decades, he was everywhere on German screens and nowhere in the international consciousness. The most dominant feeling was frustration, Waltz later admitted. I was slaving in the theatre for years on end on TV and in little movies. For me as a person, it was increasingly not okay. One German television executive even told him he was only good for quirky minor parts. That comment cut deep. Here was a classically trained actor, fluent in multiple languages, with impeccable technique, being told he was destined for the sidelines. But what that executive didn't understand was that Waltz wasn't just learning his craft during those 30 years. He was building something far more dangerous. A complete mastery of character psychology that would later terrify audiences worldwide. The impossible character. By 2008, Quentin Tarantino was working on his World War II epic, Inglourious Basterds. He'd written what he considered his greatest character, Colonel Hans Landa, the Jew hunter. But there was one massive problem. Landa wasn't just multilingual. He was a linguistic genius who could switch between German, French, English, and Italian mid-conversation. He wasn't just intelligent, he was a master manipulator who could charm and terrorize in the same breath. He wasn't just evil, he was a Nazi officer with such complex psychology that he felt almost human. I knew that Colonel Landa was one of the greatest characters I've ever written, Tarantino said. But I didn't want to do the movie unless he could be as good on screen as he was on the page. Tarantino spent an entire year auditioning actors across Germany. Hundreds of talented performers read for the role. None of them had everything he needed. The linguistic demands alone eliminated most candidates. Those who could handle the languages couldn't capture Landa's terrifying charm. Those who understood the character couldn't deliver the multilingual dialogue convincingly. As months passed, Tarantino grew desperate. He'd created a character so specific, so demanding, that he began to wonder if he'd written something unplayable. I was literally starting to think that maybe I wrote a part that was unplayable, he admitted. There was one morning I called the producers and said, "Guys, I'm not trying to freak everybody out, but I don't know if we're going to find Landa. And unless we find the perfect Landa, I'd rather not make this movie." That's when Christoph Waltz walked into the room. The audition that changed everything. What happened next wasn't just an audition. It was a masterclass in why 30 years of minor parts had actually been the perfect preparation. Waltz began reading the opening scene of Inglourious Basterds, the farmhouse sequence where Landa interrogates a French farmer hiding Jewish refugees. But he didn't just read it, He performed it. He started in French, his accent perfect, his tone conversational yet menacing. Then he switched to English, maintaining the same unsettling charm. When the scene called for German, his delivery became more authoritative, more commanding. He even threw in some Italian for good measure. Christoph walked in and started his read, recalled producer Lawrence Bender. He was speaking in French, then he went to English, then at a certain point he went to German, and then he went into a little Italian. Quentin and I just looked at each other and our jaws were down on our knees. But it wasn't just the languages that impressed them, it was how Waltz understood the character's psychology. Landa wasn't just a Nazi, he was a predator who enjoyed the hunt. He wasn't just intelligent, he was someone who used his intellect as a weapon. Waltz captured all of this in a single audition. We just could not believe it, Bender continued. Christoph was so humble when he left. He said, "Thank you, Mr. Tarantino. It's such a pleasure." And we looked at him and said, "No, you don't understand. Thank you." He walked out of the room and we just high-fived each other. Tarantino knew immediately that his impossible character had found its perfect interpreter. I remember thinking, "We're making a movie," he said. The Anatomy of Terror. What makes Hans Landa so terrifying isn't what you'd expect from a movie villain. He doesn't scream or lose control. He doesn't rely on physical intimidation or obvious threats. Instead, Waltz created something far more unsettling, a monster who operates through politeness. Watch the opening scene of Inglourious Basterds. Landa arrives at the French farmhouse like a gentleman caller. He compliments the farmer's daughters, asks permission to smoke his pipe, and speaks in measured, almost musical tones. But underneath this veneer of civility, he's systematically dismantling the farmer's defences. "You're sheltering enemies of the state, are you not?" he asks, his voice never rising above conversational level. The question sounds almost casual, but it carries the weight of a death sentence. Waltz understood that true evil doesn't announce itself with dramatic flourishes. It seduces you with charm, disarms you with intelligence, and destroys you with precision. Landa never loses his temper because he never needs to. He's always 3 steps ahead, always in control. The genius of Waltz's performance lies in how he uses language as a weapon. Landa insists on speaking to each person in their native tongue, not out of respect, but as a demonstration of power. He's showing them that he understands their culture better than they do, that he can infiltrate their most intimate spaces. He always wants to know the exact phrase and accent in a native speaker's tongue, Waltz explained. This indicates an extraordinary attention to detail, but it's more than that. It's psychological warfare. The transformation. After Inglourious Basterds premiered at Cannes in 2009, Christoph Waltz's life changed overnight. At 52 years old, he went from German television regular to international superstar. The performance that had taken 30 years to prepare for earned him an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. But Tarantino wasn't finished with Waltz. For Django Unchained, he wrote a role specifically for him, Dr. King Schultz, a German dentist turned bounty hunter. This time, instead of playing cinema's most charming villain, Waltz would play one of its most noble heroes. The character wouldn't have existed without their collaboration. "There would be no King Schultz if I had never met Christoph," Tarantino said. The character was written specifically for him. Where Hans Landa was cold and calculating, Dr. Schultz is warm and principled. Where Landa used his intelligence to manipulate and destroy, Schultz uses his to educate and liberate. But both characters share Waltz's signature trait. They're the smartest person in every room they enter. Watch Schultz's introduction in Django Unchained. He approaches a group of slave traders not with violence, but with verbose politeness. "These days I practice a new profession, bounty hunting," he explains.
These days I practice a new profession. Bounty hunter. Do you know what a bounty hunter is?
He explains, his German accent lending authority to every word. He's courteous, even apologetic, as he kills the men who've been brutalizing Django. Waltz brings the same linguistic precision to Schultz that he brought to Landa, but now it serves justice instead of evil. His long monologues about German folklore and American mythology aren't just exposition. They're a masterclass in how intelligence can be used to elevate rather than destroy. The method behind the madness. What separates Waltz from other actors isn't just his linguistic abilities or his classical training, it's his understanding of character psychology that goes beyond the surface. For Hans Landa, Waltz didn't just study Nazi ideology, he studied the psychology of predators. He understood that Landa's true pleasure came not from killing, but from the hunt itself. The character enjoys the intellectual challenge of tracking his prey, the satisfaction of solving human puzzles. "I was really interested in what's behind the lines," Waltz explained. "There is so much in this person's mind and Quentin gets so much of it onto the page. I was just interested in finding out what that was." This psychological depth is what makes Landa so unsettling. He's not a cartoon villain or a mindless brute. He's a recognizable human being who's chosen to use his considerable gifts for evil. That recognition, the understanding that intelligence and charm can serve darkness just as easily as light, is what makes the character truly terrifying. For Dr. Schultz, Waltz applied the same psychological rigor, but in service of heroism. Schultz's verbose explanations and cultural references aren't just quirks. They're the behavior of someone who believes knowledge and civilization can triumph over brutality and ignorance. The Waltz effect. Since his breakthrough with Tarantino, Christoph Waltz has become Hollywood's go-to actor for complex, intelligent characters. He's played James Bond's nemesis, Blofeld, in Spectre and No Time to Die. He's worked with directors like Wes Anderson, Terry Gilliam, and Tim Burton. But none of these roles have matched the cultural impact of Hans Landa and Dr. King Schultz. That's because Waltz didn't just create two memorable characters, he redefined what screen villainy could be. Before Landa, movie villains were often one-dimensional threats. After Landa, audiences expected something more sophisticated. They wanted villains who could seduce them intellectually before destroying them emotionally. I recently was asked by someone who needed to know how much I thought, what percentage exactly, I thought my career was due to luck, Waltz reflected, and I can give him an answer. I know exactly to the dot what percentage I owe to luck, 100%. But that's not entirely true. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Waltz spent 30 years preparing, mastering languages, studying psychology, perfecting his craft in roles that nobody outside Germany ever saw. When opportunity finally arrived in the form of Quentin Tarantino's impossible character, he was ready. The legacy of fear. Today, when we think of great movie villains, Hans Landa stands alongside Hannibal Lecter, Anton Chigurh, and the Joker. But Landa is different from these other monsters. He's terrifying, not because he's insane or supernatural, but because he's so recognizably human. Waltz understood that the most frightening villains are the ones who could exist in our world. They're not comic book characters or slasher movie killers. They're people who've chosen to use their intelligence, charm, and cultural sophistication in service of evil. This is why Hans Landa remains so unsettling years after Inglourious Basterds' release. He represents a kind of evil that's both historical and contemporary, both specific to Nazi Germany and universal in its implications. He's the reminder that civilization and barbarism can coexist in the same person, that the most dangerous monsters are often the most charming. Christoph Waltz didn't just become a great actor, he became the architect of a new kind of screen terror. One that doesn't rely on jump scares or gore, but on the far more disturbing realization that evil can be intelligent, cultured, and utterly convincing. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying performance of all. We are committed to releasing 2 videos a week. Like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more film lore.